a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Hello, everyone. Well, my day started off crazy, but I'm trying to relax because I know this is going to be a good interview. My guest is Jay Knutson. He is a member at Early Spirit and a founding member of Spirit of the West. And I believe it's all about Celtic music. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Not all about Celtic music.
Okay.
That's an influence. I mean, it was a part of the very foundation of where it grew, but it was I wouldn't say it was the prime motivator by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay.
In either Early Spirit or Spirit of the West.
Oh, right. I'm just reading off of your profile off of Facebook, so that's where I get some of my information from. So tell me about your music career. When did it all start?
I was playing in bands through high school, like everybody else. And I was thinking about that the other day. It's just about 50 years now. I went on the road when I was 18, as soon as I graduated, rather than just jumping right into college. I had an opportunity to go out and tour at that point with the band that I was playing with. And that just kind of kept rolling for a few years, probably for about 3 years till I was 21. And then I decided I'd better get something a little more substantial under the belt to fall back on, just in case that career in rock music wasn't working out at that point. As it turned out, it was all good, but I did go back to school, and I ended up getting my degree. I was going back originally for music, but interestingly enough, I found that was not exactly the most creative of venues to take as far as going to school for. It was either you're going to teach or you were going to be playing in pizza places, and with a lot of other players that were really great players, but there wasn't much of a market for especially the jazz programs that I was kind of involved with at that time. So I ended up going into journalism. And I started to work in journalism, and I got my degree in journalism. And to make a long story probably even longer, I ended up here working for a radio network in the Lower Mainland, a news network, and I was doing primarily news, which at the time was exciting because it was really quite different than I'd always been interested in that part of it, but I never thought about it as a career. Having said that, that would have been early 80s, and I had got a job as I was working as a stringer and a reporter for a radio station in Australia, which I had the opportunity to go in and work there and be based. I was doing some stringing for CBC and was also working for doing commercials, voiceovers and things, because I had an American accent, and they liked the American accent down there. So I ended up playing in a bunch of goofy commercials. I was a Marine for Westinghouse skillets, and I was a football player, and I did a razor commercial, a shaver for Remington, things like that. Anything that was kind of that had the need for what they construed as American accent, having a rather neutral accent, as we do in Canada, works well. But I wasn't on air so much. I was doing production. Through that, I met musicians there in Australia, and it just reignited my love of the musical part of it. I started to play with a few of them in Australia. The music scene in Australia at that time in the early 80s was burgeoning and was exciting. And I thought, I was still only at that point 22, and I thought it would be way more fun to travel around Australia and see the entire country playing in a band than it would be to stay holed up in a studio doing commercials day in and day off. So that's what I ended up doing. Got into the band. We relocated. I was in Adelaide for that period, relocated to Melbourne, and we're working in Melbourne. So I did that for about a year and a half, and then I needed to come back to Canada for visa and such, and had great plans of bringing the Australian band, which was called Young Modern, back over to Canada, and working with some of the agents that I had been working with prior to when I left. And as we got back to Canada, the band in Australia kind of imploded, as they do when everyone's trying to have kids and trying to make sense out of a rather crazy lifestyle. So I was back here at home, which was good, but it was sort of a case of having to start again. I had the default button of going back into journalism, which I did, and got a job at CFUN, actually, in Vancouver. And but at that point I'd been playing rock music with the band in Australia, but I was initiated and had the opportunity to sit in with some great players from what they call bush music, which was actually folk music. Mm-hmm. And one player in particular, whose name's Eric Bogle, famous folk musician, wrote, the band played Waltzing Matilda and a lot of great songs. He lived not far from where I lived. Mm-hmm. And he was originally Scottish. And so I was writing songs and playing material that was similar in that bent to folk stuff. When I came back, I reacquainted with a friend of mine from North Vancouver, who, interestingly enough, had taken a jump into playing Celtic music. And so we thought, well, this is an interesting combination. So we put some original songs together. That was Jeff Kelly and myself, and kind of it became, I guess, was the sort of the touchstone of what Spirit of the West evolved into. Shortly after that, John, who was going to theater school with Jeffrey's wife at the time, came in to sing some songs with us. And it all just kind of, we found we had a lot of common ground. We wanted to do original material. We wanted to be able to write. And then that was the seed of what Spirit of the West ended up being. And it grew from there. And at the time, trying to make a living at playing folk music, especially that based folk music, was pretty much suicide. You couldn't. So everyone was working other jobs. But it got to the point after a little while, and after the first album came out, we had some success on some of the, especially college stations and university stations. So, and then the Pogues kind of hit. And it became all the fad, that just, it was all the fave to be able to play that sort of thing. And we were already sort of doing it. So we stepped into it almost unconsciously. And all of a sudden there was an audience, and we were playing at universities, and then it started to garner some ground. And we all wrote songs, so that wasn't really an issue at all. And it was more just kind of figuring out exactly who we are. And then the band over the years evolved. I was with that band for about 10 years, and then I relocated back east to Montreal. I married a gal from back east, and was then playing in the French music market for about the better part of 10 years, 7-8 years, which at the time we had been on the road with Spirit of the West for 2.5 years solid before I moved back. And we were so tired, and everyone was at that point where they wanted to have kids, they wanted to settle down, they wanted to do that. Well, I was in a relationship, but it was back east in Montreal, so we'd come back off the road and I'd jump on a plane and go right back. And it was kind of crazy. So I finally decided I was staying out there, and Spirit of the West went on to be very successful. And I was playing with a band called Heart Rouge, which was based out of Montreal and out of Paris. We worked in Europe quite a bit, to the French market, which I really knew nothing about. So it was a wonderful opportunity to step into a world that I wasn't familiar with. And of course, language was an issue. I called it submersion rather than immersion, because it was my working language, but I was, fortunately, being music, I could speak more through the instruments than I had to verbally. So it was all good. And we stayed that way. I ended up working with Connie Calder as well, who was married to my brother-in-law at the time, after I got married out there. And so we reestablished, I was playing with Connie, and I reestablished sort of my foot in the English market again, relocated to Ottawa to kind of split the difference between the two solitudes, and then started to work on my own material. And I've got, I guess that would have been the late 80s. Oh, pardon me, the into the 90s, and then started to do my own material. And I've got 9 studio solo albums out since that now, and have worked with a number of bands back, and of course relocated back to Vancouver when all was said and done. So kind of went full circle, and once again dabbled into journalism a little bit. It's always been kind of like I say, the default, but it's been a really interesting journey. And the last number of years, of course, has changed everything, turns everything up on our heads. It's just upside down. COVID was a real game changer. And then I kind of reached retirement age. So you never really retire from playing music. But as far as any of the structure, I was teaching at Simon Fraser University for 12 years when I came back. And I was also working as a music director for a youth orchestra here in Vancouver, based on the North Shore Celtic Ensemble, for almost 20 years. So I kind of retired from that formal teaching aspect of what was going on. And now just continuing to hit my head against the musical wall, because we just do, and one day it'll make a dent, maybe, you never know. But having said that, I'm enjoying this part of it. It's taken a lot of the pressure off not having to do it for a living. So it's a difficult business to have to make a living out of it. It's a completely different perspective than being able to do things because you just want to be creative. I mean, it's always lovely to incorporate the two, but not always possible.
Yeah, right, for sure. That's been quite an interesting and varied career in a way, I mean, music, understand, there's always been there in a way, but music, and then in news, and then instructing at the university, it is like, Well,
the interesting thing about the university was, and I would have never conceived it, nor would I have conceived of, the very reason I didn't stay in school taking music was because I didn't want to teach, just be kind of based in teaching in that alone. It was always about the creating part of it and the performance part of it, and of music for me. But when I was working as a director for the North Shore Celtic Ensemble, I was asked to be a part of a weekend kind of retreat to readdress the way things were being taught at universities. And it was just kind of a brainstorm session for the weekend, but I ended up getting into some great conversations, one in particular with Michael Hayden, who was instructing physics there at the time in applied sciences. And everything about music has its basis in physics. Now, I had never studied nor had any background at all in physics, but working with Michael, there was so much commonality between the music and the physics that we melded the two and formed a course based on the physics of music, which we deemed logarithm and blues. And it ended up we put it together in about 6 months, I guess, and kind of derived a basic format. And a year later, we were encouraged to deliver the course, which I did, and it was so much fun. It was so much like performing, lecturing, and it was real hands-on, lots of experiments. We were able to quantify everything that was done, because again, it's all about resonance and controlling, and music by definition is simply organized sound. So once you go and consciously start organizing sound, you're creating music. Now, it might not be to everyone's cup of tea, it might not be to their particular preference, but that's essentially what it is. I mean, once it's organized, that's the difference. So then you begin to look at, well, when you analyze these frequencies, these tones that we create, there's commonality that we can refer to instinctively. There's intervals that seem harmonious, and there's intervals that seem dissonant. And we gravitate towards the ones that are far more harmonious in our own minds, of course, and that we can relate to. And it's no coincidence that the very fabric of music today, and pop music and blues music, has come through back from the chant de répond, the call and answer of slaves in the fields. And it goes right back, those intervals that they were using, those common intervals they were using for harmony and responding, go right back to Gregorian chant, which is all still the basis of what we call 1-4-5 pattern, which is essentially, for anyone that's listening that's a blues musician, you know that is the structure, the very fabric, the foundation of what blues is. And virtually all pop music contains a 1-4-5 progression as well. And it's fascinating when you start dissecting, and you can actually bring these up on scopes. They all share this commonality. They all share tones that will work together, and tones that don't seem to work together, but then that can also be a creative tool to cause tension. A minor chord, for instance, would conjure up perhaps a sadness or a reflection or a calm or a heavy sound, whereas a major third, which again was not even part of the equation for 700 years after the Gregorian chants were, because majors just weren't, major third just wasn't part of the dialogue, wasn't part of the recipe for writing. Now we look upon it as a happy sound. It all works psychologically, but again, it's the formula, the recipe for these things is very much structured in the resonance and the compatibility of those tones to work with one another. So there's so much to the physics, the propagation of all of the sounds that we create. If you look at a lot of the instruments behind me here, guitars, it's simply stringing a string from point A to point B, and then plucking it, and that resonance that you create is the tone which you can control. And say we put it to an A, which is at 440 cycles, or pardon me, 220 cycles, the lower A, per second. Then if you divide that exactly in half, then that becomes 1 octave higher. That is exactly the only real harmonious, fully harmonious interval that shares the exact same recipe, tone recipe, overtone recipe, that the fourths and fifths especially are really, really close, but the only true interval of complete harmony is an octave. But just by plucking that and knowing the other strings and where they work, it's how we tune guitars, it's how we tune pianos, and then the propagation of sound through a wind instrument, for instance, blowing through a tube that creates a resonance in the tube, and then by putting holes along that tube, you're cutting it in half or in a quarter or in thirds, and there you're creating your whole scale. And on and on and on and on it goes. So it was a fun course to develop and to be able to explore, because it was something that I hadn't really explored that in depth before. And it's like anything else. It's about, for the students that were taking it, it's about knowing your instruments. It's like your tools. It's your tool belt, and to be able to know and understand that makes you gives you a far greater palette to be able to paint with creatively and understand and know the limitations of each instrument, and it's and the colors, the waveforms, which are all radically different too. And once you put them on scopes, you can see this beautiful kind of sine tone, which is an even tone, and then to things that are like a double reed instrument, like say a bagpipe or an oboe, and it's this harsh kind of square sawtooth kind of wave, but they still resonate at the same frequencies if the same tone is played, and therefore work in harmony, and it just creates a little different complexity to the waveforms that are created. So yeah, it's always really fun, and that went by in a heartbeat. 20 years done, it's just there you go. So here we are again, and just now upon reflection, it was a great opportunity, but not one I would have anticipated.
Right. It sounds awesome. One of the things I think about both music and both musical instruments, like I'm affected by certain types of music. I always had my preferences, like anything that made me want to dance.
Mm-hmm.
My first go-to, although I love all kinds of music. And then for instruments, certain instruments just go deep inside, like a drum that an indigenous person would play, or alto sax is one of my other favorite instruments that I listen to. But then when you hear other music, like Celtic music, whatever it is, and you see a whole new world if you never listened to it before, right?
Yeah. Well, there's so much variation in the application of what is essentially the same musical form. We all are basically utilizing the same tools, and percussion instruments are different. They're, with the exception of with the kettle drum, the big kettle drum in the orchestras, it's not tuned in the same way. It doesn't create a full band of tone to work with the way it's broke down. It's not in the same patterns. It doesn't have that recipe. It doesn't have that tone recipe. You can imply tuning, and drummers will argue to the end of the day about getting the drums in tune, and they do, because you're implying it, but it's never going to set it up in the same way that, say, playing a chordal instrument or a melody instrument does. It doesn't create the same kind of waveforms. Having said that, as you just pointed out, it's so instinctive, and it's so comfortable for us to be able to relate to rhythm.
Yeah. And
again, it is such a huge part of what we do melodically and structurally to create the songs. So much is rhythm dependent, and to be able to incorporate all of those different influences, as I think one of the things, getting back to the early days when we were sort of forming what we were going to do with Spirit of the West and the writing thereof, we had so many influences that were naturally around us, not only because we had grown up in a rock generation, but also because our parents were from exposed to say more of a Celtic tradition, or there was just it was really just a bit of a mishmash. But one of the things, I mean, gosh, it's like, that's essentially what we are. We're a true mosaic of all of these influences from all of these different cultures. We're all kind of Heinz 57 in Canada. So, and we didn't want to be stuck as an Irish band, because we weren't Irish. I mean, I'm a quarter Irish, but nor Scottish, nor English, nor from the East Coast, which we got pegged with a lot when we were starting off. Oh, it's just like the East Coast. Well, we wanted to do stuff that was inherently West Coast, and we called it West Coast Celtic. But so when we were writing stories about what happened out here. There was lots of stories about shipwrecks out here that we could write about. We didn't have to dwell on the ones that happened back east, or certainly from the ones that were from the original Celtic nations. But that just became intuitive, and something that we were far more familiar, and something you could relate to. Because again, when you're writing material, as you probably know, it puts you in place. When you're singing, you're always going back. I'll do songs now that we did back then when I'm performing, and I'm still venturing back, going back to the same place in my mind that song that it's describing, that I remember seeing or hearing about when writing it, even if it was 30 years ago. And there's a beauty to that. It transcends the whole timeline continuum. It gives you the opportunity to be able to continue to live that particular time. And other people relate in the same way, for wherever they might have heard that song the first time. and so it draws them back. So there's a timelessness to it, and that's something that is pretty special about playing music, and I think it's a huge draw for maintaining that over the years.
Right. One of the things I was curious about is the name of your you chose for your website, your .com is Canoe Songs.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because that is the correct pronunciation of my last name, Knutson. It's a hard.
Okay.
And yeah. But in fact, I'm kind of giving up the ghost because I did a little thing last week online about it. But when I was living in Quebec, it was very difficult when I was performing for the Quebecois to pronounce my last name. I mean, it's difficult for anyone. It's Norwegian in background, but it's and I was just in Norway last summer, and it's like Smith over there, so it was awesome. It was the first time in my life everybody pronounced the name and knew the name, for the first time. But having said that, when I was living in Quebec, I used to say, look, because they would just look at it and think, I have no idea what to do with these K's and N's and U's and words, as soft as it. And so I'd say, let's just think of the boat, the little boat, the canoe in France. And, or, tag it on with sun, soleil.
Yeah.
If you say canoe sun, that's as close as we're going to get. And that's perfect because that's better than most of the people that I grew up with are saying. So it ended up being the way that I would relay how to pronounce it. And then everyone got it. It wasn't an issue. And then I thought, well, Canoe Songs kind of is the logical little play on words. So that became the website. And I use the CANOE,
right,
the little boat, just because then it kind of clarifies the actual pronunciation.
When I introduced you, I assumed that I should have asked ahead of time, but I assumed the K was silent.
Oh, believe me, from my grade 1 teacher through till to this very day, it happens. It's not that I'm offended by it. It's like anything else. Like I said, we're a real mosaic of all sorts of different cultures, and the British one overlies that by and
names, whether it's your family name or your first name, they can be quite interesting, because people see my name, Guitar, and they're not sure if they should pronounce it like guitar.
Yeah.
For some strange reason, they think, is that really what the word is? And it's, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound exotic enough, does it? It's something that we know to as like a utensil for me. So,
yeah.
For
some reason, English people don't pronounce it the way I pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
To us, it's a French name, and we don't say, I don't know how they say guitar or something like that, but we say guitar, and it's like, you pronounce, the English people, it grates sometimes, you're saying it wrong. But names are fascinating. I like that about names.
Oh, yeah. And again, because we've had, I guess, it's certainly in my background and even the other guys that I've been working with over the years, there's just so many different influences now.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that part of it. I love the fact that it's really become more about where we are now and what's relevant than tradition is something that is, and this has always been kind of the rule that we've lived by is it's tradition was always something that we upheld in the highest regard and really respected as far as even in the musical tradition of what was going on. Right. We never tried to sabotage traditional Celtic music or anything in what we were doing. We respected all of that and recognized that as a part of what we were. Right. But in order for tradition to maintain and gain a relevance to today, it needs to evolve continually. We need to continue to create new tradition, and it's incumbent upon us, I think, to use all sorts of different influence to be able to continue that, recognize where we came from, but also know where we're going, and to be able to use, like, on the West Coast, we're still just kids and compared to the rest of the world. So there's just so many influences that we have here and that we were incorporating, and that makes it far more interesting to me anyway.
Yeah. I just got the notice from Zoom that we're going to run out of time soon.
Oh my gosh.
I know it goes so fast. And now I'm going to include your website, and that's www.knutson.com, right?
Songs plural, yes.
Songs plural, or also Early Spirit as well, right?
Yes, that's earlyspirit.ca, and
Okay.
we have a new album that's called The Hollow Tree that is out on Early Spirit. We've got 2 albums with Early Spirit, and then I've just put out 2 new albums actually on my site on Canoe Songs as well. I've always kind of kept the 2 of those separate, just because one is very much band oriented, the other one is whatever I want to do. So, which is fun too. It's nice to have both of them, but they're both interchangeable. So.
Great. Well, just stay on camera. Just want to say goodbye to the audience. So, yes, you've been listening to no, I got to be careful. Jay Knutson works okay. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna put his website so you can check out his music, and it's fascinating. I hope you enjoyed listening to him as I did. It's, you never know how interviews are going to go or the roads they're going to take. So it's always fabulous as far as I'm concerned. So thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you continue to do so. Take care and peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.